In celebration of the Palos Heights 60th anniversary in 2019, the Palos Heights Library researched its local history collection of oral histories, photos, and articles to create this video production of the story of Palos Heights. It's a story that began when glaciers receded, leaving behind rich, fertile farmland that eventually became home to Native American tribes until the end of the Indian Wars in the territory and the issuing of land grants to settlers in 1834. Settlers traveled to the area, attracted by the landscape and by the prospect of land and a new life. 1914 saw the establishment of neighboring communities of Palos Park and Worth, and much of the early life in the Palos Heights area began with farmers as well. Farmer families such as the Schultz, the Bones, the Powers, the Driscolls, Feldners, and Dornheckers have been here for many generations. Early resident Eva Bone recalled farming with horses in the early 1900s and growing crops like sugar beets, corn, potatoes, onions, wheat, and oats. Farmers also raised cattle and livestock throughout the area. Many residents also remembered farm stands, such as the Primes and Deeks, where they could buy fresh produce. Palos Heights resident Irene Crooks remembers one of the farms in Palos Heights.
On the corner of 127th and Harlem, there was a big piece of ground up there, and this gentleman had horses in there. And later, he had beautiful horses. And later on, he brought in sheep and not a whole lot, and cattle. And he seemed to be interested in prize stock. We used to like to go by there and see the sheep. They were so pretty and white. And we always referred to it as the horse farm. But he had brought these in later, and but we were gone before anything happened to that place. But we heard later that he sold out everything, and then I guess sold the property.
The building of the Calumet-Sag Channel also shaped the development of the area. In Chicago in 1871, before the fire, the city couldn't keep up with the population explosion, which wreaked havoc with the proper sewage removal, causing multiple health epidemics. The sanitary and ship canal was built as an answer to those problems between 1892 and 1900 to reverse the flow of the Chicago River so the waste would be carried away from Lake Michigan to the Des Plaines River and eventually to the Mississippi. Because waste was still traveling down the Calumet River and entering Lake Michigan, a plan was authorized in 1903 to build the Calumet-Sag Channel to reverse the flow of the Calumet River, again taking waste away from Lake Michigan to the rivers flowing to the Mississippi. Author Richard Lanyon talks about the formation of the Cal-Sag Channel.
The Calumet feeder, outlet for the west branch of Stony Creek, cut through Saganashkee Marsh, with glacial bluffs to the north and to the south. The wide, flat valley floor, nestled between glacial moraines, appeared to be an ideal place to build a canal.
Construction began of a canal in 1911 on the west end of the town of Sag Bridge by President de Lamont and proceeded east towards Blue Island. The start of World War I slowed the project with shortages in materials and labor, but was finished in 1922. The size of the canal was to be only 60 feet across because the federal government would not allow more water to be diverted from Lake Michigan.
The narrow channel was not adequate for efficient barge traffic, and channel widening began in 1955 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Many bridges had to be rebuilt, requiring longer spans and higher clearance above the water. The 1939 Harlem Avenue Bridge was rebuilt in 1964, 5 years after Palos Heights was incorporated.
As the canal changed the geographical face of the area, property developers were attracted to the abundance of land. In 1935, Robert Bartlett, a property developer, began to develop the area he called Harlem Heights. His vision was to bring people out to this area and away from the crowds of Chicago. The community of Palos Heights in 1937 covered the area from 119th Street to 127th Street for the north and south boundaries, and then west with 76th Avenue to Oak Park Avenue on the east. James Paddock, who started working with Robert Bartlett in the late 1930s, explained,
I don't think there's too many people know how Palos Heights started right from the drawing boards, and in fact it wasn't even called Palos Heights when it started. It was called Harlem Heights because it was on Harlem Avenue. And here was the Robert Bartlett organization laying this Palos Heights out. This really, Palos Heights started in 1933. That is the assembling the land. Started about 1933, right in the depth of the Depression. Nobody was selling anything. The real estate business was, well, there wasn't any.
Bartlett glamorized the country life by promoting farmettes, which included large third-of-an-acre lots, which were more than 5 times the size of the average city Chicago lot. Owners were given 6 fruit trees, 6 grapevines, and 6 shade trees, along with incubated chicken eggs for those who wanted to raise chickens. Bartlett said, quote, "This area was a wilderness. When I bought it, it was only a farm, and the only house was a farmhouse. After 1 year, the firm was ready to build its 40th house." End quote. The Palos Regional News reported, quote, "One tract on the west side of Harlem cost only $165 an acre. The first lots were sold for as low as $390 for half a lot, and frontage lots on Harlem Avenue cost about $1,200. End quote. The Palos Regional also reported in December of 1941 there were 276 families in Palos Heights. Palos Heights resident Lou Reaney and his father Vince Reaney are pictured in front of Palos Heights landscape in 1942. In the 1920s and 30s, sharpshooting and skeet shooting were great forms of recreation. The Palos Heights Trap and Gun Club was formed in 1938 on a vacant lot and grew over the years to become one of the largest Chicagoland gun clubs. People would participate in shooting competitions. Located at 7500 West 119th Street, which is College Drive today, the gun club was sandwiched between 76th Avenue and the Canal. The gun club sponsored competitions such as the Windy City Windup, which attracted skeet shooters throughout the Midwest. New facilities were constructed to accommodate the larger crowds, such as those shown here in 1948. This land later became the grounds for Lake Catherine. At this time, there was no form of government. A group of citizens formed an organization called the Community Club in 1937 to, quote, promote community welfare and improvement and to promote neighborly goodwill, end quote. Though the club started primarily as a social club to organize parties and other events, it quickly grew to monitor fire protection, schools, roads, and other aspects of daily life. They held meetings every month in the community house, which was located a few blocks east of Harlem on 121st. This building served many purposes for the town besides the community club meetings. It housed many parties, community gatherings, and served as the first home of the Community Church of Palos Heights, later the Palos United Methodist Church, and held gatherings and other social events. The need for a fire department became apparent after the first major house fire destroyed the Carr home in Palos Heights in April of 1938. In response, the community club organized the Palos Heights Fire Department in 1938 and appointed Clarence Jensen the first fire chief. In 1939, the community club purchased a Model A Ford for $190. Equipped with a 40-gallon tip-over soda acid extinguisher, a 100-foot garden hose, 2 axes, hand extinguishers, and a ladder. The Bartlett Company offered the use of a storage shed located behind the Bartlett office off of the northeast corner of 123rd and Harlem, which the volunteer firemen rebuilt into a new fire barn. In 1940, the community decided to formally incorporate the Palos Heights Volunteer Fire Department, and they requested donations from all homes in Palos Heights of $2 a year, which covered most of the costs of the equipment. Additional donations and fund drives were used to fund the building of a new firehouse and upgrade equipment for public safety. One such event was the annual Firemen's Ball, which began in 1939, drawing large crowds of community members to become known as one of the top social events of the year. Early Palos Heights resident James Paddock recalled the ball.
We all bought tickets to the Fireman's Ball whether you went or not. That was like a tax. If you didn't buy a ticket, well, you made yourself, gee, what a chintzy fellow. Yeah, of course, everything is relative, but it wasn't expensive. And then, of course, when they get big attendance. And, of course, the firemen were all the bartenders and so forth, so that the music was usually contributed in the beginning, so that some of the firemen they played the banjos and the trumpets and different things, so that they would do pretty well off these original parties to get themselves organized.
After the firehouse was destroyed by a coal gas explosion in December of 1945, plans for a new building began. The new structure, located at 123rd Street and 72nd Court, would also house the Palos Heights Public Library, which had also recently lost its home after the sale of the Palos Heights Community Club building. Roger Bushy, who served 40 years with the Palos Heights Fire Department, including as chief and trustee, shared his memories.
When I came out, the original fire department, not the original firehouse, but the firehouse at the present time, when I came out in 1950, was on the corner of 123rd and 72nd Court, and it was a white building that recently the police department had before they moved over to the city building. And we shared that building with the library. One part of the building was for the library, and then the two bays were for the fire department. And we had an old international truck that was used from the city for an insurance service. And they were all proud of the 1947 International truck with a John Bean pump, which was the first new truck that they had. And of course it was 3 years old when I came out, and when they came out from the city and saw old trucks, it just looked very old-fashioned, and I couldn't imagine how anybody could actually fight fires with that equipment. But I learned how. And
the Palos Heights Women's Club had established the library in February of 1944, gathering 1,600 books for the opening of the first library in the Walter Ward home at Harlem and 122nd Street. By 1945, the library moved into the Community Club building until it moved once again in 1947 to a small area in the fire station. Until 1960, the library had been totally maintained by private donations and volunteer work. After the city incorporated, the library became a service of the city government, and plans to expand the library space began. The fire department moved into a new building in 1961, and the old firehouse became home to the municipal court, police offices, and a much expanded library which tripled its collection of books from 3,000 to 9,000 volumes. The library moved to its current location at 12501 South 71st Avenue in 1972. The Palos Heights Women's Club formed in 1938 and took a very active role in the forming of the community. The group organized community dinners, parties, various fundraising causes, and more. One community event, the Sweetheart Ball, became a major highlight of the year in Palos Heights. It was held annually around Valentine's Day, starting in 1942, often at the Navajo Country Club. As the rural community of Palos Heights grew in population, so did their need for services. The call for incorporating into a city with a formal government to establish police protection, street improvements, and zoning protection began as early as the 1940s. Resident Mary Lou Hamilton talked about her views on becoming incorporated.
We were in the Bedford Park Police District, and I remember one time having my car stolen from in front of the old Jewel where the furniture store is now. And who do we call? Well, they kept calling Bedford Park, and finally Palos Park picked it up. And the Palos Park police got so upset, they said the guy will be across the Indiana line with their car before anybody moves, you know. That was another reason. We had, I can think of a number of things. One year we had dog packs so bad, absolutely no control over them. And I had a dog pack outside the bedroom window. I had 3 small children, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, it was so bad they woke us up. And we went in, and one was tearing the other one's throat from ear to ear, and it was just awful. Couldn't let the kids outside the door. And who do you call? We finally got some dog catcher through the county, through somebody I knew in the city. I called and said, what do we do, you know? And they came out, and they just said, where are the dogs? Well, they're not going to stay in one place waiting for the dog catcher, you know. It was just a conglomeration of a whole lot of things that were just very unsatisfactory, really. And that was one of the reasons we went to work toward incorporation.
Residents of the small community were at odds regarding their future. Many who opposed incorporating Palos Heights wished for the area to stay the same. They feared higher taxes and a loss of freedom and independence. Virginia Richards, the co-editor of the regional newspaper, described her memories of the incorporation.
There was a very bitter fight before the town was incorporated. A lot of people wanted to keep the town just like it was, and they couldn't see that the town wasn't going to stay like it was, that it was going to grow, and that it had to have law and order and village officials and things like that.
Longtime Palos Heights resident Claudia Bactenica described the level of discord during the push to incorporate the town, remembering how her family was the target of abuse from those who didn't want to incorporate, noting that a, quote, little friendly place turned into a war zone, end quote. Her family received phone calls at 2 in the morning every day for a month, threatening the safety of their children if they didn't back down, because they were told, quote, this is bigger than you are, and you can't fight it, end quote. Eleanor Cahill, who along with her husband James, owned Cahill's service station at 123rd and Harlem in 1945, she shared her memories of the incorporation.
It was a very bitter rivalry. There were a lot of nasty things went on that don't sound like people of Palos Heights. I know a man, my brother was going in his home, and this man ran over his lawn to deliberately splash him with muddy water. And this was a very upstanding citizen in Palos Heights, and I couldn't believe that. And my husband felt that he should not take sides because he was dealing with all the people in the Heights. So we didn't.
Votes for incorporation failed 3 times, in 1949, in 1956, and in February of 1959. Finally, residents voted a 4th time on April 11th in 1959, and the vote finally passed 850 to 684. Palos Heights officially became a city on April 16, 1959, and elections were held quickly for offices in the new city, with Z. Errol Smith elected as the first mayor. Before incorporation, Palos Heights depended primarily on the Cook County Police. Many community members felt additional protection was needed, and the community club started their first police protection service in 1948 by hiring a watchman to patrol the area. It was not until 1958 that the community club organized a volunteer police force, and shortly after incorporation, on September 10th of 1959, the city of Palos Heights appropriated funds for the training and equipping of the police force. Chief Howard Tuma is shown here in 1962. As the city grew, additional police were needed, and an auxiliary police force was established in 1968. As the population and services grew in the community, so did the commerce. In the early 1950s, many of the roads were gravel, and Harlem Avenue was known as Route 42A instead of 43, as it is known today. Early Palos Heights resident Irene Crooks remembered the country roads in her oral history.
Well, coming off Harlem, they were rugged, they were, full of holes, which I imagine almost any subdivision that starts up would go through the same thing. We managed all right. If you would hit a hole, so what? And the ditches were much deeper when we first moved there, then later on, before we filled in. And I remember a couple of times that there was little accidents where buses would turn the corner and then maybe go in with their front wheels or maybe their side wheels. And if there was anybody handy to help them get out, fine. You know, he got out in a hurry, but otherwise he had to wait till somebody come along and help him to get out of the ditch.
One of the first businesses to be established in Palos Heights was the Royal Blue, a grocery store owned by Joe Leonardo off of the southwest corner of 123rd and Harlem. Other businesses that followed included the Palos Heights Pharmacy, opened by Vincent and Ann Reaney on December 15, 1940 at 12309 Harlem. Vince served as the sole pharmacist between Oak Lawn and Lockport, providing medication and advice for the community. Their son, Lou Reaney, is shown on the saddle of Fred Mulhausen's horse. Fred was a longtime resident of Palos Park, and he would ride over to pick up his purchases at Reaney's Pharmacy, shown here circa 1942. Reaney's was also the gathering place for the young people in the community, at the soda fountain, or even to watch movies that Vince Reaney would project on the outside of the building in the parking lot on summer evenings. In her oral history, Ann Reaney shared her memories of the store in the 1940s.
And of course the big thing was the teenagers. The first New Year's we were here. The teenagers came in. They were all standing outside of her. We were open from 8 to 11 at that time. And they were standing outside as a group. And one of them came in and said, "Would you please stay open till 5 minutes to 12 so we can have a Coke together? We have no place to go." So I looked at my husband and I said, "Well, I think we can do better than that. Tell the kids to come in." I said, "We'll do better than that." We had a jukebox at the time in the store. So I said to my husband, "Start making milkshakes and I'll go up and make some sandwiches." So I went up and I had baked a ham, so we made sandwiches and milkshakes, and the kids had a party, which was maybe about 14, 16 of them, something like that, teenagers. So every year after that, they planned no other party but at our house, New Year's Eve. And we taught the kids how to dance, and so until after the war. And every time one went to war, the party was at my house. When one had come back to visit the first time, the party was at my house, all the time. Until after the BJ Day, then that was the last big party that we had, and they all kind of went their way and got married and went different places.
Palos Heights didn't have a traditional downtown, but the commercial heartbeat of the city was the 123rd and Harlem area, with businesses such as Smith's Variety Shop, the Harry Corsi Tavern at 127th and Harlem, Halig's House of Color, Cinderella Shop, Jolly Jay's, Palos Auto, Cahill Service Station, and Shapiro Shoes. Many longtime residents have fond memories of the Ben Franklin store, operated by Arthur Grill, who spoke here.
Our store was then grills 5 and 10 cents, because at that time it was Butler Brothers were our suppliers. They wouldn't give us a franchise because we didn't have the money to open up a nice big store. So we decided to do it on our own, franchise or no franchise. After 3 years, when things started to look better, they decided we should become a Ben Franklin store.
Lifelong resident Claudia Botanica described another early favorite shopping destination, the Cinderella Shop, which was the place all young women would get their dresses for every social event that came up in the city. Another mainstay of the community was the Regional News, which was the Palos Heights local newspaper published by Harwell E. West, pictured here. The first issue of the Palos Regional was issued on October 7th, 1941, in the form of a pamphlet informing citizens of a wide range of small-town news. From lightning strikes to soldiers returning from the war and to results on a duck hunting trip. Carl and Virginia Richards bought the newspaper in 1947. Here's what Virginia Richards remembered.
Then one day the Regional came out and he said he regretted that he was going to have to cease publication because he was too busy to keep it up. It was just a sideline of him. So my husband says, "I'm going over and talk to that guy." And stupid me, I didn't know what was up. He came back and he said, "I bought the Regional." I said, "You did what?" I bought the regional for $100. I said, what are we going to do? Well, we got to get busy.
Much of the work for the paper was done in the Richards dining room until the first regional office and plant were purchased from the Bartlett Realty Company. The building had previously been housed in the Bartlett Realty offices. The regional contributed to the community throughout many public service initiatives, such as the popular dog vaccination drive shown here in 1959, when they held a campaign to vaccinate the community dogs population because there were no veterinarians in the area. Another mainstay of the community was the Palos Hospital. In 1920, the religious Hospitallers of St. Joseph acquired the 40 acres of land off of 80th Avenue and 123rd Street, then known as Mount St. Joseph, and that would later become Palos Hospital. The original site was used as a farm to supply food for the St. Bernard Hospital in Chicago, and also as a novitiate for young women. In her oral history, Sister Adeline Wise, one of the sisters who arrived at Mount St. Joseph in 1936, stated the purpose of selecting the site for the future hospital.
Well, the hospital was purchased with the view in mind that they would have a hospital out here someday. And also, they thought it would be an ideal place for young ladies who were entering the religious life. It would be a good area for them to begin their religious life. It presented solitude and quiet and away from all activity, which are one of the requirements for starting out on a good spiritual and religious life.
The sisters lived on the grounds in a large white house on a hill. Nearby, a smaller house served as the home of the chaplain. Caretakers for the farm, including the Parto family, lived nearby and worked the land to grow various crops until 1955.
In 1968, they annexed the hospital to Palos Heights, and the water and sewer contracts between Palos Heights and the sisters were confirmed. And then in 1969, they started building. January of 1970, the excavation for the new hospital began. And the hospital was opened on March 19, 1972, to take patients.
The schools in the area began when the first settlers came to the area. Land was appropriated in 1896 for a one-room schoolhouse to be constructed on the northeast corner of 127th Street and Ridgeland. Pictured here is the Burr Oak School circa 1909, which consisted of a one-room with one teacher instructing students in grades 1 through 8. James Paddock recalls.
The schools at that time, when they first started, there was one-room school at 127th and Ridgeland. It was a little stone school, brick. And about 1939 to 40, they built a four-room school at the 127th and 69th Court.
Real estate agent Robert Bartlett donated the land at 127th and 69th Court for the Palos Heights School, shown here in the dedication in 1941. Thousands of students attended the school until it finally closed in 1975. The school was torn down in 1989. The workmen carefully removed the arch from the school entrance, which residents worked to preserve. It is currently located at the grounds of Lake Catherine. Other schools in the area included Crab Orchard Junior High School, which is the current home of the Palos Heights Recreation Department. The Crab Orchard School closed in 1974 with the opening of Independence Junior High in 1975, which was located right behind it. Other public schools included Navajo Heights School and Chippewa School. Several private schools existed in the area, including St. Alexander's Grade School, Chicago Christian High School, and Trinity Christian College. One of the landmarks of the community that has its roots back in the early days of the area is Lake Catherine. Gareth Blakesley, the chief naturalist and director of Lake Catherine's Botanical Gardens and Cultural Center, talks about the origins of Lake Catherine.
The reason why Lake Catherine exists, not only does it stem from that, from an idea, but also goes back to the fact that it came from an industrial past. And the industrial past was based on the geology of the place. The geology of the place was that this is part of a natural wet area that used to be part of the Chicago outlet, where at the time Lake Chicago, which would become Lake Michigan, drained out through the moraines just west of here. And because of that, it created a low wet area, and that's why they put the Cal-Sag Channel in this particular location. So the industry came from the geology, and then the geology turned into kind of making it into a spoil site. The industry then turned into an idea, and the idea was to create a nature center. And it's kind of really born from the dredges of the Cal-Sag, really. When they created that between 1911 and 1922, they basically put all the dredgings from that on the side. And so it turned into a forgotten land of where people would just go there and go hunting. There was even some reports back in the early 20s and 30s of people who would actually go down there and do a variety of trapping. And there's some sort of anecdotal evidence to suggest that people might have even lived down there in like shacks. Back in the 80s, mayor at the time, Eugene Simpson, had this idea of creating a nature center along with a development. And his idea, and so it's rumored to be sold, is that he would sketched out this idea of a nature center on a napkin at a pub somewhere in town, and that this was going to become the idea for Lake Catherine. And obviously this whole site was just kind of completely blighted beforehand. They spent a lot of time and effort taking out all the rubbish that was found in these locations. It was it wasn't an official dump site, but it was certainly a site where people went to illegally dump and like ride their ATVs around, or like get up to shenanigans, all that kind of stuff. And they started digging what was to become Lake Catherine. And the lake itself is actually a wet detention basin that they needed to actually take all the water from the development that they're going to use TIF funding for to actually help fund the development of Lake Catherine. And at the time, Eugene Simpson wanted to create more of a North Woods feel. So as they dug the lake, which is a wet detention basin, as I mentioned, they naturalized it. They put lily pads in these areas. They also put a variety of conifers around the location to kind of create that North Woods feel. And it sort of developed and matured over time. They put in a waterfall a few years later. And the waterfall also was meant to kind of conjure up those images of Wisconsin North Woods and running water.
And here, longtime Palos Heights Mayor Bob Strauss remembers.
Well, my recollection of Palos Heights and what it means to me is that I got out of college in 1973. Madeline and I got married in 1974. And right after that, I was going to graduate school, and then I got a job with Worth Bank on 111th Street, and we decided to move into Worth. And we had a condo over there, which was actually we were renting with an option to buy, and deciding what we wanted to do. But all during that time, we used to just love to drive through Palos Heights. We'd take our bikes and go through Palos Heights, and we were just amazed at the beauty of the town and the streets and the trees and things such as that. And we fell in love with it. Things have changed over those period of time. I mean, I've been involved in the community, whether it be in banking for that many years, actually 45 years next week. And I've been in the southwest suburbs that whole time, and pretty active in the town, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce and Sertoma, Rotary, St. Alexander's, things such as PYB. I coached. And I've seen a lot of things change over the years. One of the dramatic things that has changed, and we've talked about this at council meetings and the like, is the complexion and makeup of the downtown area, the Harlem Avenue corridor, as it would be here. At one time it was 2 lanes, it was expanded to 4. But I remember specifically being Art Phillips, the former alderman, who he and Frank Passarelli kind of chaired their own little economic and business development committee back in the early 80s, coming to me and saying that Harlem Avenue was 100% full. You look at Joe Daniels, I mean, that was a men's clothing store, that was a bud store for men. You look at what was Sambuca's and now Zachary's Tap, that was Palos Sports, which is still in existence, but it's more of a online operation and works out of an industrial park. Where Capri was a jeweler store and I call it a head shop. Back in the 80s, when you drove down Harlem Avenue at, say, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, on a weekday night or a Saturday night. The stores were closed. There was nobody there. It was empty. You do it now. Saturday night, drive by at 7 or 8 o'clock, the streets are packed. We've got people spending money all the time. One of the things that I'm excited about is, we've been able to take and change the facilities we've had here. We've improved the facilities as far as Lake Catherine. We've added the bike paths, the CalSag bike paths. We also, the recreation center. We didn't have a recreation building. We do now, which is fantastic. We've also been able to keep the pool open. A number of years ago, we were going to close the pool, and the people who were active in it made a concerted effort to support it, and we were able to get some grants to do that. That, along with what we've done with the police department and public works, I mean, all in all, we probably have one of the greatest police departments there is. Palos Heights is just a great community to live in, and you couple that with the fact that we have some of the greatest school systems, from an elementary and secondary education side. This is a great place to live. We can care about the people. This is all about the people. The politicians should be nothing as far as the town itself. It's about the people.